So welcome everybody to the next Cooperative Women's Voices event, and I'm delighted that joining us today is Tiziana O'Hara. So Tiziana, it's lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. So Tiziana was born in Italy and is now based in Northern Ireland, where she has been involved in co-op development since 2012. She's a founder member at Cooperative, which is Northern Ireland's co-op development body, and we're delighted that she's joining us here today to share her story. As you know, this is being recorded and will go up on YouTube very shortly. And I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, who will be leading questions today. If everyone can keep themselves on mute, that would be fantastic. And there will be time for questions at the end. We are a small and select group today, though. So if anyone does have any questions, just put your hand up or do mention anything in the chat. Over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, maybe we could have it more conversational this time. But yeah, just to restate, really, the purpose of the Women's Voices is just to, it's to understand the source of women's lives, and what is it that's driven in the co-op movement to be where they are, really. And it's very informal, but that's the key thing: is what is the source of women's lives. So I know, Gillian, we've talked to you, and today we're talking to Tiziana. So I'm going to start with a very loose question, and we have some complimentary photos as well. So let us know when you want us to share them. But it's just thinking through. I know we had a pre-brief with you last week, but it's just some of those key influences when you were growing up. In terms of, could you just talk through? With the caveat, we want to know who you are and the source of your life. Who are some of these key influences for you growing up?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you both, Sarah and Becky, for inviting me. Really, you don't have a lot of occasion and opportunity maybe to tell your story, especially in a podcast. I think this is quite exciting. I'm, as they introduced me, Tiziana O'Hara. My name is an Italian name and my surname is an Irish name. It's a strange combination, but that explains a bit the part of my life. I came here and married a local man in Belfast. This is why I came here. But I was born in Italy 54 years ago. I look very young, I know, but I'm 54. I was born in 1968 in Milan, a big city, really. So it was a big change to come to Northern Ireland. And I didn't come here directly. My journey was a bit around Italy and around Great Britain before coming here. So there's been a lot of peregrination in my own life. Put it this way. My family was a very normal Italian family, mom and dad and a sister. Between me and my sister, there are 5 years, and it's quite a big gap. One of the things I could say, Italy, as you can imagine, or certainly this is what you probably believe, it's a very patriarchal society. And in some sort of way, I was lucky enough that my dad was not that kind of image in my own growing up. He was not the father and a dominant father that maybe some of my friends had. So my dad really taught me the values a bit of life, and these values were honesty and integrity, and act with those values was an important part of how I grew up. But one of the most influential figures, I would say, was my grandmother. Sarah, I mentioned her to you, and I forgot to tell you that today would have been her birthday, 15th of November. And she would have been 180 years old. Can you believe it? There is some kind of conspiracy sometimes, things align in that kind of way. But yeah, my grandmother was inspirational for different reasons. Of course, she belonged to a generation that lived through Second World War and even First World War, because she lost her father in the First World War. So, and then she lost her husband in Second World War. So she taught me quite a lot about survival in some sort of way in difficult situations, and not being afraid to life. Go for it. Despite all the difficulties that she had. And Italy was a kind of a difficult country, as we all know, after the war, a reconstruction. She moved to Milan, where she raised a family without a husband. And then she took care of her mother as well.
Can I ask you around that? 'Cause I know
Yeah.
last week you were saying about women around that time, that you mentioned the term trauma and freedom. There was that mix of trauma but freedom for women.
Yes.
I'm really interested, actually.
I think that war brought a lot of trauma, a lot of loss, of course, and a lot of death. Most of my families have been, affected by, the generation of my grandmother have been affected. And of course, the generation of my dad, because he was an orphan. Yeah. He grew up with this idea of being an orphan. But on the other hand, my grandmother and her sisters, that they were all kind of affected by the war in some sort of way, also discovered the freedom to be actors in their own life in some sort of way. Yeah. And they didn't, my grandmother in the middle.
Fantastic.
They came to visit me in Northern Ireland. You see behind that's the Jan's Causeway.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, that's the famous Jan's Causeway from behind. Yeah. And she came to visit me. And next to her, it's my aunt. I had a predominantly female family. So all these, there were 5 sisters, and all 5 sisters had all female daughters, except my dad. Wow. So my dad was the only man in. So this is why probably my dad was not really a traditional male. He absorbed a lot of feminine values. And I thank my grandmother and her sister for that. But yes, the freedom bit came as independence. So they try to all build a life without, for force of course, relying on men. So they become all very much independent. Yeah. And very much trying to survive. That's my dad. The woman in the white, the little girl in the white, it's me and my sister. Me at 12. And my dad, that I always thought he looked like Paul Newman. Please do tell me that he looked like a bit like Paul Newman.
Mr. Handsome.
Very handsome man. He was a very sociable man as well. It was always that's again, my dad and me and my sister. Yeah. My sister as well has been a very, very important part of my life. I always felt very protective and very close to her emotionally, and part of me coming away from Italy, there is a bit of breaking heart as well to have left her behind. Sometimes I wonder, she should have come here with me. And that photograph, there are 3 of the 5 sisters. My grandmother on the left-hand side, the woman in the middle is Zia, one of my aunts. There are 3 sisters. The woman in the middle went to live in Emilia-Romagna. So I was spending quite a lot of Emilia-Romagna, it's the region of cooperatives in Italy. Okay. Emilia-Romagna is a farming region. Right. Now, yeah, a consortium, they were all around the place, and she went and lived over there. So every so often I was sent during the summer to spend my time on farms in this beautiful region of Italy. The other woman, it's the woman that went eventually to live outside Italy because her husband had to emigrate for different reasons after the war. He was a migrant for work, but also for political reasons. Yeah. So in some sort of way, all of them had to cope with some difficulty. All of them became very independent women. Mm. And there are 2 missing, but they have similar stories. One was, for instance, a single mother during the war, and the other one, the final one, decided to leave her husband after the war.
Right.
And so when a divorce was not possible in Italy, think about that. So it was a kind of, they made the choices to live their own life according to their own kind of beliefs. And that was freedom in some sort of way.
Yeah.
But that's my time in Italy. I stayed there in Italy until I kind of did all my schooling and my primary school, my secondary school until university. And then you remember Europe at that stage was very open to exchanges, and through one of those Erasmus program, I arrived in London. And that's where I met my husband. That I didn't know that was from Belfast. And Belfast in that period was only on the news for the bad reasons that we all know. But I fell in love with him, and I guess the love is what brought me eventually here. Yeah. But I did like Great Britain a lot. I did like to study in Great Britain. I thought
St Andrews, was it? What did you do in St Andrews?
Yeah, so the Erasmus program was I think I didn't mention in London was with the old Polytechnic of North London.
Right. Okay.
It was a fantastic place to be.
Yeah.
It was so full of interesting women and people in the middle of Camden Town.
Wow.
And that gave me the taste for how you structure your knowledge in this country that was different from what I used to in a university in Italy, where even knowledge is very much controlled in some sort of way, and there is a dominance of men lecture and also people. Instead, in Italy, in London, I became exposed again to that taste of a more accessible knowledge. It's a silly example. I was struck by your libraries. Polytechnic of North London was a really, really bad building with kind of was not the best facilities that we would call, but the libraries was open shelves. So you could go in, have access to books without asking for a book. You have no idea how different is that approach to being instead obliged to ask for a book that you are interested in. First of all, because you needed to know what you are interested in, and you needed to know the title. Instead, when you browse through a shelf, an open shelf, and you can actually pick and choose.
It's a curiosity, isn't it? It allows you
absolutely. That was maybe that's part of my own nature. Very curious. I love to understand other people. So I remember picking up a book on semiotic. What was it? I didn't even know. I wouldn't even know how to tell you now, but it was actually the novelty of some concepts that really interested me. Yeah. And that was an example. So I loved London. And then when I went back to my own university, I promised myself that I would give myself another year, at least, to study in the UK. And this is when came about a scholarship to go and study in St Andrews. I didn't choose St Andrews because it was famous. I just chose it because I liked the courses, the philosophy of science courses that I really did like.
And you chose logic and metaphysics. Is that right? Yeah. What's that about?
Well, it's a philosophy course. It's a philosophy course. It's about the exploration of what makes an argument a good argument. Right. Where is truth and persuasion? I mean, there are all different kind of interesting, different ways to look, but mostly exploring scientific concepts like the concept of number into a philosophical way. What does it mean?
Yeah.
And then maybe you started to acquire a certain level of relativism rather than absolutes. You know, nothing is given. Everything needs to be really discussed and questioned.
Exactly.
I loved it. I loved it. I loved it because it was a smaller place, but also because it was again another example of a different way of studying, a different way of relating you with the material that the professors were giving to you.
Yeah, and there was a theme that when we were talking last week, this idea of freedom and, you know, curiosity, and I guess that fits into, you know, into that really. So, so you ended up in Belfast in the early 90s. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you were doing there? You obviously followed your heart, so you moved to Belfast for love. So what work-wise and what intellectually were you doing there?
Well, first of all, I didn't come here with the idea of staying here, you know.
Yeah.
I was just to say, in my mind, there was 1 year only. See how it goes. Yeah. Also because of the reality of Belfast, that was still a bit scary in 1991. Yeah. Was still a very divided city, and the divides, the barrier that you actually saw around that city were really physical barriers. And it was a reality that was difficult to navigate, especially for somebody that was not brought up. But also was a reality that was fascinating, how people came to accept that reality and didn't find that strange. I still remember my little brother-in-law when we went through a shopping center and the guard at the door asked me to check my bag. I found that intrusive, offensive, and certainly I didn't want to do it. I mean, I was not used to it.
No.
And my little future brother-in-law that was only 12 would say, why? He asked me, they don't do that in Italy? Like that he was reading the world through his eyes, and I was reading the world through my eyes. So there was some kind of their realization of how you are accepting reality around you, sometimes without questioning it.
And it's interesting because there again, I think you were saying about how the human condition can kind of endure and adapt to conflict, really, which is, yeah, it's, I guess you have to really.
And I felt sorry, for this young little, child at 12 that thought that reality could be only this. Definitely was not only this. If only had the opportunity to go maybe a few miles away. So it kind of made me realize about my own kind of way of looking at reality. Also, that sometimes we become too much involved in what is our present, that we are not lifting the eyes and say, well, this is possible.
Yeah. And I can imagine in the 90s, early 90s in Northern Ireland, you're very much still looking in the present day to day, aren't you, really, in terms of...
Especially 91, and then there was a ceasefire, then there was a breaking of the ceasefire, and then there was that surge of willingness to change in 1998.
And do you want
was
to talk,
the Good Friday,
which segues really nicely into your, so you, in terms of your work, your political awakening.
Yeah, in some sort of way, yes. The Women's Coalition, they've been really. I was very lucky and privileged, Sarah. I can't say that enough. I don't know, but I came to work for the Women's Coalition, and I worked for them in the early 2000s. That was after the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was an interesting period to be involved.
Yeah.
I worked with the two MLAs that at the time were elected in Stormont, Monica McWilliams and Jane Morris. And I met an enormous amount of women that stood as candidate at different elections, being Westminster or the council election or again the assembly election later on. So I was really surrounded by a group of women that were very willing to look at their own differences, but also to discover what they shared. And I think that was a great political education. Not only political education, but also a type of education that stood well for me for my future work in cooperation. You know, I remember going into members meeting with the Women's Coalition, and they were not easy meetings. You know, there were a lot of difficult issues to talk about. And I learned and I witnessed how conflict could be navigated in those meetings, how words could be used to persuade each other, and how to keep open that space of conversation constantly, even in the most difficult situation.
And that's the key, isn't it? It's those spaces. I mean, it's fascinating just from my own background, really, of understanding that. It's everyone's got their own, you know, style. Everyone's got their own reason, motivations for being in that space. But actually, you know, the beauty is that you create space for all those voices, you know, and that's where the kind of, sounds a bit trite really, but the kind of the really magic and the new things can happen, really. So
and that was the strength, I thought, of the Women's Coalition, because it was a coalition. It was a coalition of different voices, and actually allowed a lot of different voices to be part of the conversation. That, first of all, voices that they were not part of the conversation before the Women's Coalition. You know, if the Women's Coalition would not have formed, most likely through this peace process and the Good Friday Agreement, those voices would only be reported, but not heard. Exactly. And that was an important other teaching maybe of all these women around me. And, you know, and it would be easier to pinpoint to Monica, to Jane, because they were the MLAs, but there were many others there that they didn't become representative, but they were very active in preparing policy, in discussing, in questioning what we were doing. I remember couple of women said that during membership meeting, the only thing they were asking were the hard questions. And you need all that tapestry of women combination in order to create something. It was something different. Sarah, I look at the manifesto. I look at the manifesto of 2003, and I don't know, you could actually see it, and I'm so surprised even now. You know, I was reading it just last week. This is the copy that I actually use. All these people were, all these women were actually stand for election in 2003. By the way, spoiler, we lost the 2003 election very badly. But if you read that manifesto, and it's kind of, you know, so long, there are some elements in that manifesto that were so before their time. They themselves, they are talking about a caring society. What does it mean to bring a care at the heart of policy in our newly formed Stormont? And they were talking about social economy, a kind of a concept that probably no other kind of a political party would have even breach. You know, they were bringing new thinking and new ideas in economy, in social life, in community life. And most of all, there was always this commitment to create a safe and supportive environment for all. Safe and supportive environment for all. And I think that's what the bigger teaching I brought back. And safe doesn't mean that we have to be all in agreement. So that was the office I worked with. So the person that actually took the photograph was one of the MLAs, Jane Morris.
Right.
You can see Monica is the third on the left, Monica McWilliams, if you recognize her. But Margaret Ward is an historian and a very interesting woman. Shannon, the first woman on the right, is a great friend, Annie Moore, that unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago.
Right.
And very, very suddenly and with a great loss. Then it was me, look at me, young, very nice, good looking, still good looking. And then the next to me is Anne McCann, another beautiful woman that I work very close. She was my direct coordinator, and she was a lovely woman from the peace movement.
Wow. Okay.
After that, there was Chris. I still meet Chris. Chris, a great woman, a press officer. And you see the last two women at the table, those are my friends. They became my friends.
Mm-hmm.
So this was an office where, yes, we were talking serious things, doing important things, but also building friendship. And I think that's an important part of the Women's Coalition experience for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating around the women's movement. Really, it's the friendships that are formed around politics and a shared politics. Really,
yeah.
So
those two women at the end, they were, and unfortunately, again, I lost one of them this year. So cancer.
Yeah.
So it was, and I still can't get over it. But
so what's her name? What's her name?
Liz Byrne McCulloch is the lady on the right.
Yeah.
And then Judith Cross is the lady in the middle, and it's myself.
It's a beautiful picture. It's a very happy picture.
Yeah, we were very happy. We usually create even after the Women's Coalition. So the election was a big change. In 2003, we lost the MLAs. We lost a bit similar to the election that we just passed in some sort of way, where the middle ground, in some sort of way, the smaller party in the middle ground lost their own kind of representation in Stormont. But in say so, at that stage, we carry on a bit longer because we had some councillors still active in Northern Ireland politics. So after that, all of these women that you have seen, in particular in this picture, they all went and continued to work in women's rights. In some sort of way. You probably know Monica became
she was
the commissioner, of Human Rights Commission. Actually, and many other women were involved, and so did I. After this, I went and worked for the women's sector in Northern Ireland, and I worked in two major kind of parts of the women's sector. In one for 10 years, the other one for a bit less. Women's Aid. I went and worked for domestic violence, and then the women's sector, and I formed a partnership, and I worked in partnership of women's centers in Northern Ireland across the different communities.
Yeah, so that takes us really nicely then to your cooperative.
Yes, I think I think all these were great grounds for moving into more the cooperative movement. Again, almost by chance, but chance is not something I do believe. It's more by the fact that I was very attracted to what cooperative were in Northern Ireland, that I joined the Cooperative Forum. That was my introduction to the cooperative movement.
And how was the Cooperative Forum when you joined? Was that
was a completely voluntary organization that tried to reestablish some kind of understanding of where the cooperative movement in Northern Ireland and Ireland on these islands was. remember that this was very, very close to 2012, the International Cooperative Day. So
Yeah.
in some sort of way, they were this big event looming, catalyzed the interest of the forum to have somebody there that could re-energize the movement. In 2012, we did a great a great event in Stormont, where we invited all the representative of the cooperative movement in this island. So, you know, like we were talking beforehand, that we recognize three pillars of the movement in this island. The agricultural cooperative, of course, those have been here since the 1800s.
Yeah.
Then the credit union is the second pillar that we recognized. So we invited a lot of representatives for the credit union movement. And of course, the cooperative group that interestingly was not supported, or anyway, was not widely accessible in the region, because the cooperative movement developed more its shops and their own in the east of Northern Ireland rather than the west.
Oh, okay.
So that was interesting in itself, you know, the cooperative movement and how that was perceived, but also the cooperative group and how it was perceived, but also how that was interacting with the credit union and the agricultural co-ops. And I remember looking around, and these are big businesses. You know, the agri-co-ops are probably some of the biggest in the UK, really. You have a Dale Farm, you have a Fen Valley, you have a very big agri-co-ops. And again, despite they accepted some of the invitations to connect to the cooperative movement, they kind of lost their cooperative identity, and they felt very disconnected from the cooperative movement. So the forum attempt was to bring people together, but people that could share something like the value of the cooperative's value. In particular, because it was 2012. But I don't know how successful that was to make recognize each other of the values, but certainly there was an attempt of making all this element of the movement in Northern Ireland to communicate with each other. But what was missing, Sarah, and I think this is what was the realization, what was missing was, where are the new co-ops? Where is the new people? All these are, you know, century-long standing, or even half a century in credit union from the 60s, you know, half century standing organization. Where is the new?
So it was a very traditional movement.
Very traditional.
Yeah, so
very traditional and very kind of, and almost, you know, difficult to relate or interrelated with each other. Everybody became every sector, every pillar became almost self-standing.
Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? Really.
No, and that, you know, was some of and despite our, you know, cooperation among cooperatives, it didn't really transpire.
Yeah. So that led you to form the Cooperative Alternatives. Was that in 2013? Am I right?
Yes, 2013. So there was this reflection about where are the new cooperatives, where is the interest in new innovative projects that will bring and refresh this thinking of cooperation.
Yeah.
And that was when I left the forum.
Yeah.
And I formed with two other people the cooperative alternatives. and that was a kind of also, you know, a jump between two different way of looking at history of this country, because from a traditional unionist, probably, if I hope that nobody will take offense of that label,
It's true.
into a more kind of left progressive Republican part.
Yeah.
Didn't feel comfortable with either, because my schooling in the coalition was coming from a kind of a school of ideals rather than a school of ideology.
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
So it might be worth you just saying why, because we did touch upon this when we spoke. You know,
Yeah.
What is it? Why are you passionate about cooperatives then? Rooted in that conversation just started around idea. It's not ideology.
No.
So why do you think? Why are you engaged in co-ops?
First of all, I think co-ops as a tool to create spaces democratically owned.
Yeah.
Spaces where women could also participate as equals.
Yeah.
A space that different communities could also join, again, as equals.
Yeah.
Now, that's not what is happening on the ground. Most of our cooperatives are in different areas and a single identity. But there is this understanding of growing confidence and growing capacity within your community by growing a democratic structure. And I think that was what really interested me. Up to there, well, this is only my opinion, of course, Sarah, but yeah, but up to there, what I was looking around was a very active charitable sector. But
Yeah.
we know, yeah, because this money coming to Northern Ireland had inflated and supported. I'm not saying that is not what was done was not right, but I'm saying that what was done in the usual way, that this charitable structure created also power relationship between the people that was offering the service or the help and the people that was receiving the help and the service. This idea of having, you know, somebody that could do something for somebody else without that is not very clear. What in is that this idea of you are a beneficiary, you are a victim, and I'm coming here to help you.
And it takes power away, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This was a disempowering tool that you could actually see it. You could actually see it in a women's center or in any other of organization where you wanted instead create an organization where you were in charge of what you wanted to do. You wanted to create or some type of structure in which your voice could have been really heard and be part of the decision making rather than the receiving end. Yeah. Does it make sense, Sarah? Did I express that?
It does make sense, actually, and I think, yeah, no, and I'm always interested in that, where you have where dignity, human dignity is at the heart of. And yeah. I think with co-ops, you know, that with some certain co-ops anyway, you know, that you have your dignity and you have, you know, and it's how you're part of it. It's self-help, isn't it, really? It's and you're part of your own solution, really. So, but collectively, you know, and I think
yes, and the collective approach was very important. You can't do it by yourself. So one side was kind of, to me, the cooperative kind of model was trying to help people to reintroduce this idea of collaborating, keep a space open, keep a space that for discussion and for equality. But then on the other end, it will also kind of demolish a bit that idea of we are beneficiaries of these big grants that they are coming in.
Yeah.
And we needed to fit in those programs.
Yeah.
So to me, that was an opportunity to look at how cooperatives could help to really reintroduce some of those experiences that I was very lucky to witness in other kind of situation, like the Women's Coalition and like Women Said, before it became a very much a dominant power unbalance, even in the charitable sector.
And I mean, my interest is always with co-ops has always been around, you know, because my background in kind of peace studies and things, it's around co-ops being those like schools for democracy, you know, and also
Yes.
these implicit learning spaces where yes, livelihood is key, but also the relationships you form whilst you're also, you know, collectively working, you know, as part of the co-op. Really, how does that change you as an individual? How does that, you know, when you talk about the Women's Coalition, you know, that you were changed by that experience, by the space you were in, and how in co-ops you can be changed by that experience of actually being part of the co-op, really, just personally. And I think for me, I mean, I'm always interested with women's co-ops. So, for example, in Rwanda or elsewhere, where, you know, it helps change and make women feel safe whilst also getting a livelihood. So I'm just always really curious about that aspect of cooperatives as well, you know. So what kind of co-ops were you setting up and forming then before I've got 10 minutes left, but what kind of co-ops were you involved in?
So we tried to experiment with the kind of a model in many different sectors. In some sort of way, we kind of looked at what was happening more in Great Britain, that was very much what inspired us. So we were looking at from cooperative to create community energy kind of initiatives, or we were looking at cooperatives that could bring to fruition sports associations, and we did that as well. Wow. We could look at workers' cooperative. What does it mean to have a workers' cooperative now in Northern Ireland? How do we help to set up a workers' cooperative? We also look at different type of community cooperatives in which we look at housing. And so we are working with the projects that may have, you know, an interest in providing housing in a cooperative way. Those are all cooperatives that we've been involved. So in the last few years, we've been very much engaging people around energy, engage people around food in some sort of way, and agriculture, and engaging people around the sports and housing. So those were the possibility. But for us, it was very much about how can we, cooperative came at the beginning of the 2012, 13, at the beginning of our journey, came with this idea of being an old-fashioned concept. So we wanted to prove that that was not the case, that could also be used in a new initiatives that can answer the needs of people now, even employment with the workers' cooperative.
No, exactly. And I'm going to say, so like energy, food, and housing, they're the fundamental human needs, aren't they? You know, and it's the thing of our time, isn't it? I mean, so the energy crisis, food security crisis, you know, housing, you know, I mean, co-ops are right in the middle of that. And I think, like you say, it's an opportunity to shout about that, because and the challenge always is, isn't it, around just changing the perception and just making, look, we are addressing, and we are the, you know, and it's just
And the perception, yes, has been there. And I don't think, Sarah, that we've been very successful in changing the perception in Northern Ireland. And, government that doesn't pay much attention to us. And it's more that we are connected to the bigger cooperative movement that makes us a bit more kind of sustainable. It's not nothing local, or very, very little locally sustain us. But what I am interested in is in involving people in a different capacity. And cooperatives allowed us to open the minds that there are different ways of dealing with these problems.
Because you said last week about this thing about it's not ideal. I mean, because it's the world we're in, isn't it? I mean, like you're saying, it's the ideology is destroying, democracy in some ways, and actually what is, I mean, you were saying stuff around, that co-ops are driven by people, not ideology. Yes. And it's, so maybe just want to, because we've got 10 minutes left, but it might be just touch on that about,
yeah. I think that ideals is what move people, but unfortunately it's not what moves people now.
Yeah.
And sometimes ideology has a kind of a better a kind of gets more into the news that ideals. And ideology, I always feel, and this is me, that ideology is a framework that is imposed on from the top onto the people, and you need to fit into what this ideological kind of framework is, and it's constrain what possibly cooperatives could do. I prefer a different approach. I prefer to meet people where they are at work, in building a relationship, because I don't think your identity is formed in the absence of others. You are formed through relationship. You are formed. This is my philosophical belief, and this doesn't have to be everybody, but I always felt that I'm formed through the relationship with others. And that relationship part is the most important part that comes from the bottom up, not the ideological embracing of a particular type of policy or a particular type of strategic thinking. I always feel that it needs to start from the people and with the relationship that they build.
Yeah, I mean,
and then to me, that is what you can do in a cooperative, because it's a blank canvas. When you start a project, you start it exactly from there. You don't start out where the money are coming from. You start where the people is.
And that's it. I mean, the people-driven business, people is at the heart of co-options.
Yeah, and where the people is requires, in Northern Ireland in particular, hard question: where are you at?
Yeah, and
with
so
your sense of self and with your sense of your community,
Yeah,
because it's still very fragmented, Sarah. I'm not trying to
no, it's a conversation, and it's kind of really interesting to hear you talk. And just taking us through, because we've got a few minutes left, about the role of, so what would you, there's two things here. One is, what would your message to women be in the movements and beyond, really? But also, why do you think co-ops are, or that co-op ideal is important for women?
First of all, I think that women spaces are thriving rather than expanding, are becoming smaller rather than expanding. And I know that we are in a digital kind of a society, but I don't think those spaces are actually enlarging. They are actually become closer. And the risk is that, we are closing down this conversation in what, You know, a lot of people define echo chambers. So I'm afraid of that. So I think that we need to preserve places of pluralism, places of more voices, places of differences. And these can be physical spaces like we offer in our cooperatives. And these can be, you know, virtual spaces, but I don't need them for that much outside there. So I think that we need to defend it, maybe this idea of plural voices, confrontation in a dialogue in space. I really feel that this is not the direction we are going. So for women, I would say get involved in something that makes you participate in something that is not exactly what you are thinking. Challenge yourself, challenge the thinking of your community, challenge the thinking of your heritage, challenge everything, because through that challenges, if we are doing it in a space that is democratic, where our voice is respected and supported, I think what is come out on the other end is much better than what would come out if you don't have those conversations.
Yeah, gosh, I could talk all day about this. It's like, yeah, it's those power of safe spaces and
it's about, yes, I think, and unfortunately I don't see that as often now. Even in some of our cooperatives, recent cooperatives, I feel that the choice often made is to walk out, to resign, to go somewhere else. And this is from a practitioner point of view. So my job is then to go and say, why did you walk out? Why did you walk out? What was so unbearable? What could you not express? What can we did not find a compromise on? I think the capacity of compromise is something that cooperative offer that they don't. And I've been victim, a very, very strong victim, and also enacted sometimes in the past a non-compromise mentality. So I needed to learn myself as well. I'm not saying that I'm one that always got it right. Absolutely not.
Yeah, that doesn't come across at all. It's just fascinating. Right, we've got a few minutes left now. I have to just close properly, but it's been absolutely fascinating. There's so many themes, ideas, and thoughts that are kind of swirling around, really. But for me, it's just that it's the power of the solidarity and the like you said, the safe space that allows people to grow, you know, and be challenged. And I think it's really come across really strongly. And yeah, so the last question, common question that we ask all our women is: you're stranded on a desert island. What 3 items would you take with you to sustain you?
Okay, very quickly, I've given some thoughts, and really I was crying until yesterday because I couldn't even think about it. But then I thought, what will make me survive somewhere? So I brought some seeds. Seeds.
Smart. We've not
to grow things.
We've not had seeds before.
Yeah, to grow things. And then I brought also some tools. I don't know if that was amazing. And I don't know if this is possible. This is not to encourage any violence, but you know, the Swiss Army knife?
Swiss Army
knife. And I thought, this is appeal to my survival kind of a sense. I wanted to eat and I wanted to build something. And so I will need some kind of tools to build. But then I couldn't get another object. I need the people. So I will bring with me, Sarah and Becky, I hope you allowed me, a team of women that I met during my journey with cooperatives here. So I can tell you, I will bring Lee, Bridget, and Mary, with whom we did some work in Northern Ireland, and they are fantastic. And I will bring Anne Karen, and I will bring Julie, Malini, and Anne. And this is the team of women that I thought could be great crack, great company, and also it will really help me to survive. So I need a relationship, I need other, you know, the material stuff, but the relationship is another big part.
Yeah, it's practicalities and nurture of people. But I'm not going to burst your bubble, but normally we would say no way to that women. But you know,
That's very
but
lenient,
yeah,
Sarah.
yeah.
We've said no to people before for bringing people.
We have, so we're yeah. So yeah, we are pausing on that. But honestly, so Gillian, do you have any, and Mars, do you have any questions before we finish, or any comments, or because we're a small gathering?
Just unmuting myself. I found that fascinating, and it's wonderful to know that the cooperative movement in Northern Ireland has such enthusiasm, because it's beautiful to see. It's absolutely lovely, and it's, I mean, it's being an outsider, very much big English. It seems that Northern Ireland has for so long been very separated in its communities, and there's been such a lack of trust between communities. And I think, I mean, one of my memories, the only time I've actually been in Northern Ireland was for the Cooperative Congress, believe it or not, in 2001, which was fascinating. But walking to the Congress Hall and going through the gates, 20-foot high gates that were used to split up communities. And while they were open, they were left there in case they needed to be closed again. And that is such an awful thing for a community to hanging over its head. Mm-hmm. And I think that the cooperatives and the cooperative movement can actually help to bring those communities together and give them something else to think about and a different way of communicating. And I think that's so important. So I'm really grateful that you're there pushing this, because I think that enthusiasm is what it needs.